Hi all. So this is something that I'm going to be trying in order to do some close reading exercises um, for our class so that we're not constantly on Zoom and so that you can kind of do a little bit of this work when it fits your own free time. I am making these think aloud videos. So what that means is that I'll have a passage of whatever we've been reading for homework this week. And I'll take that passage and kind of just talk through some of the things that we might pick apart if we were in a regular classroom setting. So hopefully these will be pretty short. We're not going to look at whole scenes. Yeah, so let's see how it goes. The first think aloud we're going to do is for the balcony scene of Romeo and Juliet 2.2. So, you guys have just been thinking about Petrarch. You've been thinking about how Petrarch affects kind of Romeo's ideas of love. This kind of love at first sight that he feels for Juliet, and also the love he felt for Rosaline, right? That he associates it with pain and suffering, and also the idea, yeah, he believes in love at first sight, and a lot of his ideas he's getting from poetry. So to begin, I want to just look at Romeo when he is kind of spying on Juliet. So it's after the Capulets party. He is spying on Juliet, seeing what she's doing, and what she's doing is also feeling a little mopey about kind of what's happened. That she's had this great interaction with someone with whom she's forbidden to be. So Romeo sees Juliet at the window. This is the famous balcony scene, and he says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou her maid art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady, oh, it is my love, oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it," etc., etc. And then he goes on to compare her eyes to twinkles in the sky. However, her eye in heaven would through airy regions stream so bright the birds would sing and think it were not night. Her eyes being so bright that they're like twinkles in the sky, yet even brighter than that the birds would think it was daylight had they seen her eyes. So this should be familiar territory for us. If we're looking at the imagery that Romeo is choosing to use, he has a really long extended metaphor. So he sees the light breaking, I'll use yellow here, that'll be better, in her window, and he compares her to the sun. So this again is just a very extended metaphor for Juliet. She's the sun, and she has to kill the envious moon. So this is nighttime. She's so bright in her balcony window that the moon has grown sick with envy and grief over how bright Juliet shines. He continues this kind of celestial metaphor further down when, as I said before, he compares the brightness of her cheek, compares them to stars, but even more than that, they're brighter than the stars are. So right now we are definitely in this world of Petrarch and love poetry, and specifically sonnets. This is kind of the opposite, actually, of the sonnet that we looked at. If you remember, the sonnet, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun." Romeo is actually the opposite of that. So in that sonnet, William Shakespeare is kind of making fun of like people that would compare their mistress's eyes to the sun, and ruby red lips, skin as fair as the snow. Shakespeare is making fun of that kind of poetry in that sonnet because he's saying it's kind of bad poetry. And here we actually see Romeo doing what Shakespeare was making fun of. Romeo is kind of writing cliched, stereotypical bad poetry as he is looking at this young woman from afar and kind of imagining what she's like, right? Remember, he's had very limited interaction with her. So if Petrarchan lovers, as we talked about, are supposed to kind of admire these women from afar, they're never going to be with them, they love them from a distance, and part of the beauty of that love is that they will never have them. Juliet does something that surprises Romeo. She speaks. So Romeo says, after she says, ah, me, she speaks, oh, speak again, bright angel. So again, more of that celestial metaphor here, that she's like the sun, she's like the stars, she's like the angels. For thou art as glorious as the night being over my head. So he's continuing kind of on with this very stereotypical love poetry. Now Juliet's going to do something different here. So Juliet is not like Romeo. She's not reading all the Petrarch. She says, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? So in this wherefore art is actually really important. The video that I had you guys watch online talked about it, but wherefore is just a really archaic old way of saying why. So Romeo, why are you Romeo? Why are you a Montague? If you gave up the name of Montague, I would give up the name of Capulet. Names, words, language is basically meaningless. She continues this idea further down when she says, "'Tis but thy name is my enemy. Thou art thyself, not a Montague. What's Montague? It's nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself." So this is really interesting what Juliet is doing here. Romeo in the first part of the scene is so caught up in these metaphors that Juliet's the sun, she's the angel, she's the stars. And Juliet here seems to be rejecting these metaphors. She's saying that the language we give to things really doesn't matter much. So this idea that the rose by any other name would still as sweet, what we call a rose is really meaningless because it's got this essential quality. So Romeo, the Montague, last name is meaningless. He's Romeo, he's his person, individual personality no matter what. So Juliet here is actually kind of pushing back on some of the language that Romeo begins the scene with. We won't read all of the scene, but you should, and I'm sure you will. So what continues here is that she hears him. He says, yes, I'm Romeo, and they have an interaction. They kind of feel all their feels about this interaction, acknowledge the danger that he'll be murdered, and that's kind of part of this excitement. So Romeo later on continues with his kind of MO of using this kind of romantic, Petrarchan, poetic language that they decide that they're going to be together. And he says, oh, by the blessed moon, I swear that tips of silver with all these fruit tops. So he's really kind of getting into his metaphor again. And Juliet stops him and she says, oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb. So this is the second instance we see in this scene where Romeo is kind of looking at this situation through the poetic vocabulary that he has, that here's his angel, this woman he loves, and she's so far from him. And Juliet's stopping him and saying, no, let's get real. The scene then ends with their agreement that they'll meet again the next day. So what I really want you to take from this scene and kind of keep looking for as you're reading the play is that Romeo, as you guys have talked about in class, is this kind of hopeless, romantic, not really realistic in his ideas. And Juliet seems to be taking charge. So whenever Romeo goes off on these tangents of you're the angel, you're the sun, you're the stars. Juliet says, no, actually, I'm not, but I really like you. So let's take this plan into action. So one of the kind of key things in this tragedy, again, that you should keep an eye for in your reading and that we'll talk about in our discussions, our questions, all the work we're going to be doing the rest of the year, is that they're kind of playing with fire, right? Juliet's in this desperate situation. She doesn't want to marry Paris, but she has to. Romeo is this way out. Romeo himself is really caught up in almost like a fantasy of what his love will look like, or what how this relationship would go. And so as we keep reading, by the end of Act 2, we'll see things kind of start spiraling out of control. Two teenagers, one kind of desperate to get out of her situation, the other not really realistic in terms of what love and relationships should look like, start making some really big decisions. So we'll do some more of these Think Alouds. Hopefully that is helpful for you to kind of replace some of the discussions we might have. So after you have this video, if you have any more questions, definitely bring them to our Zoom meetings. Ask them on Classroom. Send them to me privately through email if you have them. And I hope that you all are doing well. Thanks.